In the 1980s, Prince had an at times patriotic, at times cautiously optimistic, and at times a bit fatalistic look at our country and our world in general. He loved his country for the most part and where he was from, but he wasn't blind to its issues, its problems, its problematic history. And joining me today to talk about the lyrics to America is Zachary Hoskins. Welcome back to the show, Zach.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me.
Welcome back again, and this episode's all about America. I should have recorded this on the 4th of July. I just didn't have the timing right, I just didn't have it worked out right. We're recording this still in the summer, but it is a bit past our Independence Day here in America. But America is, it's the first song off side B on Around the World in a Day, so it kicks off the second side of the album. It is very memorable start to that side with the record kind of stopping and starting, and kind of sounds like a little bit like a DJ scratching, which hip hop was still a pretty new genre in 1984-85 when the song was recorded and released. It was a U.S. single in America. It wasn't released as a single in the entire world. I guess probably for some pretty clear reasons, I don't know. Not that American music is very popular across the country, but there was probably a conscious decision to maybe not release this as a song in some countries where just the title alone might be, I wouldn't say a turnoff, but just maybe not as quite as an interesting topic as like a Paisley Park or something that's more universal.
Right.
Raspberry Beret and Pop Life were much bigger hits off the record. The song didn't quite crack the top 40 here in America on the pop charts. I don't have any recollection of hearing it on the radio back in the 80s when it would have been released, which I guess coincides with the fact that I was listening to top 40 radio, and if a song doesn't make the top 40, I'm probably not going to hear it. There's a video for it, but I never remember MTV playing it. It's pretty long. I think it's It's not as long as the 21-minute 12-inch version that we had just been talking about prior to recording, but it's still pretty long for a music video. It's like 9+ minutes long, and it's essentially them doing a live jam version of this song, which that brings up a point also about America that's kind of interesting, or at least something notable, is that there's quite a few songs on Around the World in a Day, just like every other Prince and the Revolution record, that is just Prince, that just goes into the recording studio and lays down all the vocals, all the music and the harmonies himself. But this is a full band effort. This is truly Prince and the Revolution recording this song. And to me it's pretty clear, it just kind of has that more of that live feel to it. I don't know, how do you feel about that, or do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think one thing when you were mentioning, like the kind of false start at the beginning of the tape machine starting and then rewinding, and then on the 12-inch, you actually get at the end the sound of the tape running out. So it's like not only does it have a live, live in the studio jam feel, and the 12-inch just goes on. It feels like forever. But then you also have these like very obvious, it's like the song's construction is being exposed. The actual medium it was recorded on, you can hear in the song, which is pretty. It's not something that you usually hear in Prince's catalog. I can think of a couple of instances like on Got a Broken Heart Again, where you hear him. I think that's at the end. It's like clanging sound. And I think it's him putting the guitar down, so that kind of stuff, you hear it sometimes, but not very often, and not very often in popular music in general. Obviously, this is the stuff. It's like showing a boom microphone in a movie. This is the stuff that we're supposed to not be aware of.
Yeah, I almost wish that the 12-inch version, the one that lasts 21 plus minutes until the tape runs out, it would have just ended abruptly instead of they made a decision to have it fade out. So
Right.
they knew that the vocal ended or the music ended because the tape ran out. So instead of just having it end, like I said, very abruptly, which would have been a very natural sound because that's what people would have heard when they played the tape back. They made a decision to fade it out, which I get, but I think I would have liked it to be just literally that hard stop, just to kind of completely mimic the situation that occurred in real time.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
that's just me. Okay, so America kind of, I don't know, to me a little bit fits into that sort of familiar territory that Prince was mining in this time about some, not just nuclear fears, nuclear war fears, and fears of, atomic explosions and nuclear war in general, but just, it's kind of a political song in a way. It's not going to be the most in-depth or insightful political song of Prince's career. I mean, a lot of those come much later, and they had much more specific things to say about society or about racism or about what have you. But this song, I get more of a sense like this song it's trying to be patriotic in a way, but at the same time, it also speaks to like income inequality and poverty, and also just war in general, and how maybe America tends to stick our nose into other people's business and get into conflicts around the world. I mean, I don't know. Well, as we go through the lyrics, we're going to probably see some of those, some examples of that, and how he kind of provides us some insight into where his headspace was and what he was thinking about, and maybe a little bit about what was going on in the world at the time of this recording, which was been 1984, according to Prince Vault. But then again, that matches pretty much all of the songs from around the world in a day were recorded in '84, so that makes sense. And to me, it's like it's kind of like a little bit of Free from 1999 mixed with a little bit of Ronnie Talk to Russia in 1999, with also having some scare tactics added in and some fears included with that patriotism. And what other songs, or do you have any other thoughts about the overall lyrical meanings behind the song, or what the intent of the song is?
Yeah, I mean, those are the main ones for me. I think of Ronnie Talk to Russia, Free, and America as kind of like Prince's Cold War trilogy or triptych. It's they're very much coming from a similar place, having a similar kind of ambiguous relationship with America and American ideology, and he's obviously not fully enamored. It's not like God Bless the USA or any of the like really just like out and out patriotic songs. He obviously there's some ambiguity there, and there's some doubt, I guess we could say. But he's also clearly afraid of communism, afraid of the Soviet Union. So it's like there's this just weird, kind of he's kind of drinking the Cold War Kool-Aid, but you also see in the lyrics that there's a lot of pretty upfront criticisms of the American way of life, at least as experienced by marginalized people. So it's a really interesting, this is Prince kind of like figuring out where he stands politically in the 80s in real time. And I think it's interesting to contrast this, like you kind of mentioned, later in his career, he would have much more songs that were much more directly criticizing the kind of, American hegemony, stuff like Dreamer from Lotus Flower.
Right.
And so it's interesting to kind of compare with this, where he's sort of, he's moving in this direction. Prince grew up during the civil rights movement. He grew up in a predominantly black community where, he was aware of things like the Black Power movement and the riots in North Minneapolis. Prince wasn't apolitical, but he was also, the 80s were a more conservative time, and he was getting money. He was in kind of in the mainstream. And so it's interesting to see him kind of wrestle with these mainstream politics before ultimately moving into something a little more radical later in his life.
Yeah, I mean, he never goes like full bore jingoism on songs like Free or America, but it's certainly not, as you mentioned, not as fleshed out on certain topics as like a Dreamer or a Colonized Mind. This is more like your lighter weight political, like Party Up, but he's moving there, like he's getting there. He's putting a little more meat into his lyrics when he wants to go that social commentary route that he would do just a few years later, 2-3 years later, on songs like Sign of the Times, or early 90s like Money Don't Matter Tonight. Like those are more talking about the poverty and HIV and things of that nature, and then, like I mentioned, social and economical inequality. And so that's kind of where this is going. I never get a sense from reading the lyrics to America that he's really going to the places that an Avalanche or, as we mentioned multiple times now, Dreamer and Colonized Mind go decades later. So he's still figuring this out, and his political beliefs are still kind of becoming formed, I think, a bit in the 80s. And each subsequent album that includes any kind of commentary on that, you kind of get a sense for it propelling forward. Like it's constantly getting, the details are becoming more fleshed out of where he thinks our society is and where those directions are, where we need to make changes and change in direction, leadership and whatnot. So, I'm totally with you on that. And I just wanted to kind of preface the reading of the lyrics with, like, each section of the song it kind of goes in a different way, and it's like you're thinking he's going to go one way and be against communism, but then he brings it back in verse 2 to talk about just domestic stuff, and then verse 3 goes more of like a nuclear fears. And so I think now is as good a time as any to start talking about the lyrics, I guess, unless you have anything else you wanted to bring up before we do.
No, I think that's a fine setup.
All right. So one thing I like about Around the World in a Day album, I mean, it's visually it's stunning. Like just the artwork, the cover, the way the lyrics are written. I mean, he did this a bit with Purple Rain, the album before, where like the font was different for each of the songs on the back cover.
Right.
That with Around the World in a Day, it's not real clear with each song that there's a distinct font that matches what the song is, but it's a little different. Like Pop Life has got like these bubbly font, and Tambourine has all the words or the letters of the word kind of in these little boxes that almost look like a folded piece of paper that you pull out. And America the lyrics are all, well, red, white, and blue. So
right.
Pretty on the nose there. And but it's kind of neat, I just like looking at it visually. It's interesting. So I'm gonna grab the album and read the lyrics from there, because when I have lyrics available to me from the record itself, I usually try to do that because I found some of these lyric websites to be inaccurate.
Yeah, yeah.
But the one thing that some of the printed lyrics miss is a lot of the ad libs and stuff that kind of the fun stuff in the middle that maybe wasn't necessarily intended to be or wasn't written down as lyrics, quote unquote. But they're certainly in there in the song and oftentimes worth talking about. So I like having them both available. So the first verse is aristocrats on a mountain climb, making money, losing time. Communism is just a word, but if the government turn over, it'll be the only word that's heard. All right, so with the first verse, Zach, what are you seeing here right off the bat with what Prince is trying to say with this first verse in these lyrics?
Well, I think it's interesting because he's starting with basically a critique of capitalism here.
Capitalism bad.
He's starting with talking about this what we would say. I feel like the most popular term now is income inequality. It's there's these aristocrats, which is not a way that Americans like to describe themselves. That's that's calling back to like the old European class system that's supposed to be un-American, but we have this class of people, like now it would be Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg and those people who are effectively aristocrats. They may not have been born into great wealth, but they've acquired it and are now hoarding it from the rest of us. So it's a lie that I remember when I saw the Revolution play this live after Prince died, and it struck me hearing it in that context, like hearing it being played on stage now. It struck me that I had always thought of this song as very much of its time, and it is. This is kind of the Trump era is sort of like the line about history repeating itself as farce. The Trump era is to me the Reagan era repeated as farce, but it is of the time, but it's also very relevant to today. And it really struck me that I was like, oh, this feels very vital in this moment, even though obviously the Cold War is over. Global communism is no longer the threat that I think Prince saw it in 1985. But there's still a lot that applies to today. So that's the first thing. And then the second half now we're talking about communism. And this is something that kind of getting ahead of myself. But if you look at every verse, it's this pattern of like starting with a critique of America. And then the second half of the verse is like, but communism is scary. Like, like this thing about America is bad, but at least we're not the Soviet Union. It's a really interesting. It's very consistent. Every verse, he does this pivot to the Red Scare, basically.
Yeah. It brings it back to that subject each verse, even though that's not where you think it's going to go. Yeah.
Right. It's kind of like America is the lesser of two evils. Is basically what I'm taking from this.
No, good point. Good point. Because like I have in my notes, capitalism bad,
yeah.
Communism bad.
Also bad, right? Yeah.
And so, because if the government turn over, it'll be the only word that's heard, referring to communism. It's just a word, but if the government turns over, it's the only word that you'll hear. Right. And I'm guessing this is kind of like a comment on various communist insurgencies that were happening around the world at the time, where like governments were, there was an attempt to turn the governments over of some of these countries in Southeast Asia and turning them into communist countries. And so, like, is there a concern, a legitimate concern that the United States of America could be turned into a communist country? And I mean, that seems a little silly to think about, considering the size of a country and just how much money we've sunk into our our political and war machines, but at the same time, but he was seeing it, and so it was a thing. And just because
Right.
it may not be something that he has, or is a realistic concern in 1984 for Prince Rogers Nelson, it doesn't mean that it's not a concern for other people that might be listening to the song or just a comment in general about what's happening in the world. So I think that's really what I take from it. Is same as you. It's like America, the lesser of two evils, because he kicks it off with saying capitalism's bad, but that's what our society in America is based off of. But I guess it's better than communism. So
Right. Right.
yeah, so that's the first verse, and so you got to get a feel for what he's trying to get at here. I mean, he doesn't kick it off with some real glowing display of patriotism at all. It's aristocrats on the mountain climb making money, losing time, which is a pretty clear, as you mentioned, aristocrats making money is not a real positive, way of framing capitalism.
Right.
If you're just talking about it and trying to explain it to somebody, because to climb a mountain means you get to the top, and the top there's room for less people.
Mm-hmm.
It gets to a point where there's only a few people that can stand on a mountaintop because it's too narrow. So we all know what that symbolism means for the rest of the country. We're all below.
Right.
In the chorus, then, the chorus is really just kind of a take on, of course, the famous America the Beautiful song. America, America, God shed his grace on thee. America, America, keep the children free. So, the first two lines are right out of the song, the original version, but then he adds the keep the children free part, which, again, keep the children free, so you think free, freedom. You think, America's built off of freedom and freedom of choice and freedom of, religion and all the freedoms that, our country was built on. At least that was the intent. And then to make that comment, keep the children free. It's like, once again, a callback to Free from 1999. I mean, Prince was really kind of still feeling like our freedoms that we have in America, the United States of America, are really valuable to him, and he cherishes that and wants to make sure that all the children are going to continue to be free in the years to come, and we're not going to turn into a communist country.
Right. Right. And I think it's also interesting that he phrases it as an action or as something that needs to be, it's not that America is the land of freedom. Freedom is endemic to the country. It's just something that just blooms naturally out of America. He frames it as something that needs to be consciously done and maintained, which I think is another thing that kind of it gives this song a little more political bite than it could have had. Then the like really, like I mentioned, the really like jingoistic, rah rah America songs. This one is, I think freedom is an action, and it's something that can go away. And I think it's something that a communist uprising could potentially take away, but it's also something that as we see in those first half of the verses, can be eroded just within America itself. There's plenty of times we don't need communism to fall short of the ideals on which America was founded. We fall short of those ideals all the time, even without ideological enemies.
Right.
So I think it's an interesting little turn of phrase there. I also think one thing we didn't mention, because this is a lyrics podcast, but the main riff of this song is a very distorted version of America the Beautiful, and I think you can't play a heavy distorted guitar interpretation of a patriotic song without that being a reference to Jimi Hendrix's Star Spangled Banner from Woodstock. Yeah. So this feels very much in that, and that was a hugely controversial. It was honestly a very similar kind of moment because Hendrix, said that he meant it sincerely, and he wasn't making an anti-American statement, but conservative America was very incensed that he would do that to the national anthem. So it's an interesting touchstone for this song that kind of it rolls that into the interpretation just from it being there.
Yeah, and I kind of, now that you mention that, I kind of wonder if that hindered this song's crossover ability a bit as a single here in the United States. I wonder if there were some more conservative radio stations that wouldn't pick up the song because they felt like it was disrespectful, or like, oh, this is coming from Prince, the guy who's writhing around on crawling around on the floor naked in the When Doves Cry video, and
Yeah.
no, we're not playing this. This can't be anything but disrespectful coming out of his mouth, right? Probably.
Yeah. Prince was not representative of Reagan's America. I mean,
No.
he was black. He wasn't gay, but I think a lot of more conservative people would have assumed he was gay.
Yeah, based on his clothing.
He was definitely, kind of like sexually divergent in some way. There's something, this is not, he's not having sex in the missionary position, like there's something deviant about it, right? Like, so yeah, I do think, and I think that it also works against the song from the perspective of kind of more dyed-in-the-wool leftist critics who are like, well, he's not going far enough in his, critique. Like, this isn't the Clash. He's not saying, capitalism is bad and the Sandinistas are good. Like it's usually you go in the other direction. This is much more like middle of the road. He's really it's kind of just enough to frustrate both sides, because it's like he's too patriotic for the left and too kind of weird and critical for the right. Which makes it an odd song. Yeah.
I think it all probably added up to it being a missed opportunity for a single, or a hit single, I should say, at least. Surprised it did as well as it did. It almost made the top 40, but not quite. But as I mentioned, in my small town that I grew up in, I never heard it, so it's not. It probably didn't get a lot of play outside of certain markets, my guess. I do like the comment about the freedom having to be something that you work to maintain. If you're already free, you can't just take it for granted and just assume that, because as you kind of alluded to, our freedoms, many of us feel like our freedoms are at stake all the time, and some feel like it when it's maybe not warranted, and others don't. I mean, we're seeing the situation now where the wearing of masks has been politicized to the point where there are those who feel like being asked to wear a mask is a political statement, like their freedom of choice to choose whether or not to wear a mask out in public has been taken from them, and they're
right.
and they're afraid it's like this slippery slope, like, oh, you're going to make me wear a mask today, but what are you going to make me do, next year? And so the freedoms, they feel like their freedoms are being eroded away slowly over time, which is usually how it happens, if it happens at all in a country or a society. It's not just one day like, oh, I'm a totally free person, the next day after an election or something, now it's a police state and everybody has to follow these Gestapo laws. It's like, no, it's typically, it happens slowly, and that's where that side of the fence is sitting at. It's like, oh, well, this is just the tip of the iceberg. What's next? And so even whether you believe in wearing masks or not, I think the point is there are certain aspects and there's certain components of our population that that do feel that way. And then freedom is something you have to constantly kind of strive and fight for to maintain, even if you live in a free society. All right, so then moving on to the second verse. Little sister making minimum wage, living in a one-room jungle, monkey cage. Can't get over, she's almost dead. She may not be in the black, but she's happy she ain't in the red. So this is probably my favorite verse of the three. I just like the imagery going on here with, the first line, little sister making minimum wage. And so I made a comment like little sister, like literally like someone's, sister when we're talking biologically, or is it like a colloquial version of sister, coming from a black man singing the song. Right. Making minimum wage. So, I don't even know what minimum wage was in 1984, 85, but regardless, cost of living was allegedly the difference. So we would, it would be about the same as it is now. Tough to live on, bottom line. Living in a one-room jungle, monkey cage. And so what I took away, or kind of the first thing, the thought that came into my head reading those lyrics again about calling the city a jungle, is just going back to the Grandmaster Flash, Melly Mel, The Message. It's like a jungle sometimes. Yeah. Wonder how I keep from going under. Because, The Jungle also was that book about factory life, factory workers.
Right.
And so,
Upton Sinclair. Yeah.
Yes, Upton Sinclair. Thank you. But I think of it more like, I don't think of the jungle being used in that context. I think of it more now calling the city a jungle. And referencing back to the Message and how it's basically survival of the fittest, just like in the wild, and calling her the little sister's one room jungle, one studio apartment or whatever, a monkey cage, just kind of reinforces that imagery that the people who live in a city in poverty, have to fight every day for their lives. Just like the animals in the jungle have to.
Right.
And you already kind of alluded to the comment towards the end, so I'll let you take that one about she happy she ain't in the red. I like that.
That's the most extreme. I think that's the biggest pivot out of all of these. Like he paints this just dire portrait of urban poverty, and then is like, at least she's not a Soviet, that one's the one that I think is the hardest for me to swallow, it's just very extreme. He just I for the first half of the verse, I went back. The message is that's definitely an interesting parallel. I went back even further to Stevie Wonder's "Living for the City." This feels very much of that. Similar style, these like vignettes of just, urban desperation, basically. But then, he's got he's got to work the Cold War back into it. At least she isn't in the red. Mm-hmm.
No, but even if I don't, and like you, it's like, come on, Prince. I mean, but I think it's super creative, to reference that. So she may not be in the black, which is, in banking terms, that means that if you're not in the black, that means that you really don't have any money. If you're in the black, you don't have debt, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So she may not be in the black, so that means she may not have any money. But she's happy she's not in the red. So when you're talking in banking terms, to be in the red would be like to have debt, to not have money. So she doesn't. Right. So to like flip that around, she may not be in the black, meaning obviously she's poor, doesn't have money, but she's happy she isn't in the red. Well, okay, so if you're looking at that literally, then it would just be, okay, she doesn't have any money, but she doesn't have any debt either, which I guess, it's just living paycheck to paycheck. She's not borrowing anything, just trying to scrape by with what she has. But then you throw in, of course, the alternate version of red, in communism, Soviet Union, the red state, and throwing that out there for us to make sure that it's clear, like, communism is still bad. So even if in a capitalist society you can't you can't get over, as he uses, can't get over. It could be worse, right? I guess.
Right. I
You
guess.
could be standing in long bread lines and be poor in a
Yeah.
communist society.
Right, right. Yeah, thank you for unpacking that. I realized that I kind of glossed over the whole. It's a clever it's a clever like turn. Yeah, I like that the double meaning there.
Right. Even if we're not totally sold on what he's trying to say there, but I love it.
Right. I'm pretty left leaning, so like my struggle with this is like what like she's happy that she doesn't control the means of production, like, but I know what he really means. He's talking about the bread lines, and obviously, communism did not live up to the dream.
Yeah.
It's interesting that this song is also talking about how capitalism didn't live up to that either. So there's a little bit of he's pretty even-handed in his critiques of both of these ideologies.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if I had to summarize it, it'd be like, okay, well, if you're going to be poor and starving, you might as well be poor and starving in a capitalist society where you have freedoms than poor and starving in a communist society where maybe those freedoms are perceived to be not there for you, or
Right.
you have a little more leeway in a capitalist society.
Right. Yeah. And I think, again, going back to that, the keep the children free, I think Prince, certainly at this stage in his political consciousness, still kind of believes in pleading to America's better instincts. Like this is still like a Ronnie Talk to Russia moment. Like, you and I might not always see eye to eye on everything, but I think that you can do the right thing and keep make this better. If we're going to be in this ideological war with the Soviet Union, then let's live up to the vision of America as it should be, and really provide those freedoms to everyone. I think that's kind of what I get from this song. And I think later in life, Prince was a little less optimistic about being able to ask for these things, and being able to ask like the person that you put into office, trusting them to do the job that you put them there for. But at this point, I think he still thinks let's petition the government and do what's right, live up to the America that we say we are.
Right. That's still some optimism there, and you have to credit him for that. So then after the second verse, we get another round of the chorus, but one thing that he does differently is there's like this chant where he has, I don't know, I call them buzzwords.
Yeah.
Freedom, love, joy, peace. And he says peace at the beginning. I didn't mention that, but before as the song is kicking off, he does traditional Prince scream or whoop, and then he says peace, and then he goes into the lyrics of the song proper. But then here he repeats that along with freedom, love, joy. And so I just wrote these down as like, this is kind of like part his movement's buzzwords. These are the things that he's trying to push forward, as talking points. This is what he's striving for. I mean, he mentions freedom again. Freedom is obviously very important to Prince at this time, and keep the children free, and having a song called Free that was just recorded a couple years earlier, and and love has always been a part of it, and especially when you take the love is God, God is love approach towards that, so they're equal meaning. Joy, I mean, joy is just synonymous with happiness and just at peace, and if you have that, the two things, joy and peace, it's the opposite of war and peace, I guess. Right. It's just Prince just basically, for me, saying like, these are the things that I value and want for myself and for my loved ones and for everyone in the world.
Yeah, and Love, Joy, and Peace feels very hippie. It feels very like 60s counterculture kind of buzzwords. So it's interesting to see them juxtaposed with freedom, which is something that is more commonly used by the establishment. If we, so when he puts it in this context, we know that Prince isn't talking about. He's not talking about the free market, like he's
No.
talking about freedom as like individual expression, kind of in the same area as love, joy, and peace. He turns it into this thing that's, I think, dovetails very well with his personal philosophy, like you said.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's personal philosophy that he takes pieces of all these different things that he really values and puts them into this mantra that he recites a couple times in the song, and to use the words hippie, and I even wrote that down, kind of like this hippie movement. But I mean, that's what a lot of this album is to a lot of people.
Right.
Is Prince going back to that counterculture movement of the late 60s, early 70s. He's used the word hippie multiple times to in different contexts to be good, bad. And
right.
we know that he has a very like visceral feeling towards hippies and what that means to him. So he never uses that. So that's what I should really kind of preface this, is that he never really used that to define this album himself. This is something that other people did. They look at the artwork, they look at some of the sounds that are coming out of this album that he had never really explored before. Some of the themes, psychedelic themes, that especially in a song like Paisley Park or Around the World in a Day, and just we just stamp it with this hippie label, right or wrong. So
Right.
I just want to make that clear. That's not something that he used to describe this album. He never called himself as far as I know it, never called himself a hippie. That's just something we did because we like to compare art to other art. That's just what we do.
Right.
We got verse 3 at this point now, and verse 3 goes, Jimmy Nothing never went to school. They made him pledge allegiance. He said it wasn't cool. Nothing made Jimmy proud. Now Jimmy lives on a mushroom cloud. All right, Zach. Verse 3.
So I said,
Jimmy Nothing. What does Jimmy Nothing represent? What do you think he's trying to say here by framing this verse around this story about this kid named Jimmy Nothing?
Yeah, I mean, it would be a great punk name. First of all, I'll just say that if I was going to be a punk frontman, Jimmy Nothing would be a good choice for that.
Exactly. Johnny Rotten, Jimmy Nothing, yeah.
Yeah. I realized as we were reading this that I misspoke, because I said that the second verse was the like most extreme pivot, and this is definitely this is like cautionary tale morality play, like, oh, you didn't want to say the Pledge of Allegiance, well, now you're dead. Like it's wild. So yeah, I think it is like this is the verse that, as somebody who's definitely leans much further to the left, this is one that I struggle with, because I don't see as much ambiguity here. This one seems to be, like a cautionary tale of what happens when you're not patriotic, when you take your freedoms for granted, and there's none of that like critique of these ideologies that we're supposed to embrace. It's just, well, the alternative is nothing. It's destruction. It's nuclear holocaust.
Yeah, Jimmy Nothing comes across a little bit like a nihilist in a way. Like, doesn't believe in anything, didn't go to school, didn't pledge allegiance, never proud of anything, never proud to. I mean, when he says nothing made Jimmy proud, you kind of think back to the "Proud to Be an American" song,
right? Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, if you can't even be proud of your country, then what are you here for? what purpose do you serve our society? Don't go to school. Don't pledge allegiance. You're not proud of anything about who you are, where you live. Nothing, to worry about what's cool, worry about what, people think about you, and not worry about, the quote unquote threats in front of you. And one of those threats, of course, in the 1980s, especially in Prince's mind, and in many of us, was communism and nuclear war. So how does this end for Jimmy? He gets blown up in a in a nuclear blast. So I think that the cautionary tale is definitely probably the cleanest way to describe this, and it is. I guess it's just kind of like more of a comment about how things can change in a blink of an eye, and just because you don't pay attention to what's going on in the world or in the news, politics in general, doesn't mean shit's not going to go down, and you're just going to wake up one day and everything has changed, or potentially not wake up because you're dead.
Right.
So,
right.
it's like if you're not patriotic, is the country going to fall apart? I guess maybe if everybody takes Jimmy Nothing's approach.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of a silly verse, silly ending, but I think the imagery is still, mushroom clouds and
it's definitely memorable. It definitely leaves an impression. I can't fault it at all for that.
No, it certainly does. It certainly does. But yeah, it does leave you scratching your head a little bit. How did Jimmy go from not wanting to pledge the allegiance with, I guess when you're a kid, you're so reliant on. I mean, I guess we don't know if Jimmy's a kid. We kind of assume he is because he's talking about going to school.
Right, right.
But anyway,
he would be James Nothing if he was an adult.
Yeah, exactly. Jimmy's a very youthful sounding name. But yeah, I just kind of get the impression that this person, this Jimmy Nothing, is just being told, or is too worried about what's cool and worried about showing patriotism as not being cool, which I think we all have probably experienced in life. Worried about what other people think. Like, I can't say the Pledge of Allegiance. I don't want to talk in front of other people. I don't want to say it. But hey, if you think like it's going to be impactful enough and to build that kind of sense of pride in your country or yourself, to do that at a young age. And if you don't do that at a young age, maybe Prince is trying to say our society, our country is going to fall apart.
Yeah, and you know what I think is kind of interesting. Throughout this, I've been thinking about the way that the verses all take a turn, and it's almost like it's like a I guess it's a dialectic, to stay with the Marxist theme, or it's a Prince almost kind of like arguing, like having a debate with himself. Like he has these two sides that are in opposition, and then at the end, this is the resolution. But it's almost a lot of the time when Prince is talking about a character, he's talking about an aspect of himself. So it makes me wonder if this is maybe his, this is him kind of talking himself into this more patriotic stance. I wonder if there's a little bit of Jimmy Nothing in him, where but he's like, well, this is what happens if you don't believe in anything. Then it's just like what is there to live for? So it's, if you think about it as an argument with himself, this is the more patriotic side kind of winning and saying, you've got to at least believe in something, which is I think is very much a Prince idea, usually applied more to God than to country. But it does feel in step with some of the other things that he's written.
Yeah, I mean, there's the cliche, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. So
right,
kind of falls in line with that saying in a way, I guess. All right, well, I mean, after that, then we get another couple rounds of chorus. The music continues on. He says the freedom, love, joy, peace, repeats that. And I guess there's, as the song begins to fade out after the music and the chorus, there's one other line that is kind of said as the song is fading out, and it's Prince just kind of speaking it. He says, "Teacher, why won't Jimmy pledge allegiance?" It's just kind of points back to the third verse and bringing Jimmy Nothing back up. And, obviously the line is being spoken from the point of view of one of Jimmy's classmates looking over at his friend or just his classmate and seeing that he's not saying anything, just kind of sitting there or standing there, not saying a word, and just asking the question, "Teacher, why won't Jimmy pledge allegiance?" So it just kind of hammers home that point, I guess, right as the song is ending, about that third verse and really kind of the more patriotic aspects of the song. And I think of it like, is it the person asking the question because he's asking the teacher the question, or just saying that to give us all food for thought or something to think about as the song ends?
Yeah, I think that line is really interesting because the thing that I struggled with in the third verse was that it seems so pat and so much of a conclusion. Like, well, none of this other stuff, the massive inequality and the people living in poverty, none of this other stuff matters because the Reds are going to drop the bomb on us and we're all going to be dead. So, better say the Pledge of Allegiance, and this kind of brings back, it plants that seed of like, well, why won't he pledge allegiance? And it's like, well, I mean, because of these other things that were, because America isn't perfect, because there's a history of inequality, especially for Black people, for working people, other people of color, gay people, women, the list goes on, like, so I like that there's this note of resistance, like you said, very subtle, it feels throwaway. It's literally over the fade out. But Prince also always did like to do that, did like to throw in that last minute curveball. And I think that question, why won't Jimmy pledge allegiance, kind of opens up his body. This opens the door for those later, the avalanches and the colonized minds and all of those things, where he really goes into, particularly for him, the Black experience in America and how different that is from the kind of version of America that definitely you and I grew up in small town Midwest, and how unequal that is. So I think it's an interesting way to kind of end the song and reintroduce some of that ambivalence that I was missing.
Yeah, and then really that line, if to put it in a 2020 context, or even just the late 2010s to this past decade, it can be even looked at very similarly to somebody seeing a football player kneeling
right
during the national anthem, and asking their dad, why is my favorite football player kneeling? Why isn't he standing during the national anthem? It's the same kind of question, right? I mean, asking the same kind of questions. What's going on with them and their lives, and what are they seeing that's so diametrically different than my worldview and my perspective and what's happened in my experiences, that I'm standing very patriotically with my hand over my heart, and this person is protesting in this way. And it's really the same kind of question.
Yeah. It's like that third verse is Prince in his very, temptation, Old Testament kind of like, well, Jimmy, nothing is wrong, and so now he's going to hell, kind of a, and then this is him kind of pulling it back and saying, well, if he doesn't, if for whatever reason he doesn't believe in America, then that's a failing of America, not a failing of him. We need to give him a reason to want to pledge allegiance. That it's a two-way street.
Yeah, totally agree. All right. Well, there are no more lyrics to America. If we were going to talk about the 12-inch, we would be here talking about the music for an hour, but we're not.
Right.
So the radio version, the album version, is actually fairly short. I think it's less than 4 minutes.
Yeah.
So it's a quick, it's a very upbeat, fast song. I love the music to it. So it's one of my favorite songs off of Around the World in a Day for that reason. And maybe this song is not one of his most fleshed out political songs, but it certainly is an attempt. And there's some good imagery. There's some amusing turns in this song that make it, for me, a good one, an interesting one, and one that I go back to quite often.
Yeah, and I think it really benefits from close reading. I feel like, having walked through line by line and talked about it, a lot of the things that I found puzzling about it, I mean, it's not like, I'm not going to say, oh, I have the definitive interpretation of America now. But I feel like it makes a lot more sense to me now than it did when I just would be listening more passively, or just kind of ingesting it as a whole, like really walking through it and seeing, it's very rigidly structured in some interesting ways. Yeah, I think it's a song that that benefits from going through line by line like this.
Yeah, agreed. All right, well, Zach, where can people find you and your work if they were to look you up on the internet?
Yeah, so I have a blog called Dance Music Sex Romance, where I do something like this, but with written words instead of spoken words. And you can find that on princesongs.org. I just recently started on Purple Rain, blogging about every song in order. And I wrote a really, really long one on Baby I'm a Star that should keep you occupied for a while until I get the next one out.
Awesome. I enjoy your blog a lot. And Baby I'm a Star is a great song. It's you wouldn't think, just from looking down the track listing on Purple Rain, that a song like Baby I'm a Star would be have one of the more lengthy entries.
Right.
On the surface, it may not seem like it, but yeah, there's a lot going on in that song for sure.
Yeah, and a lot going on in his life at that. It's so emblematic of that shift from 1999 to Purple Rain, where he really just shot into the mainstream. And then Around the World in a Day. I can't wait to get there, because this is an even more interesting trajectory, where he gets to the mainstream, decides he doesn't like it, and basically shoots himself in the foot on purpose, so he can continue being a more on the avant-garde and not turn into Michael Jackson or Madonna. It kind of arguably hobbled his commercial career, but Around the World in a Day is what gave us the last 30 years of Prince as a challenging artist. So it's a really important album.
And you can find me on the Twitter and Instagram, Facebook, under the same name. Just look Press Rewind up. You'll find me there. And so thanks, Zach, for joining me again today. Thanks for talking America with me and helping me break down these lyrics. And until next time, goodbye.